Sir, she's the only kin I've got left. The rancher rode all night to the county line. The boy's hands were shaking when he pulled on my coat. I remember that more than anything else from that night, not the sound the sky made, not the way the horses broke loose and ran south without anyone touching them, not even the fire that took the Greer barn all the way down to ash by morning. I remember those small hands, 9 years old at most, gripping the front of my duster like I was the last solid thing in the world. And maybe right then, for him, I was. His name was Clemson Farris. Father gone 2 years prior, mother 3 weeks before that night, fever, they said, though I never asked the details. He'd been living with the Greers, Walt and June, neighbors of mine going on 14 years. Good people, decent neighbors. Walt owed me a fence repair from the spring, and I never once reminded him of it, which tells you what kind of man he was. The Greers were gone now. I don't know what came out of that sky. I'm not a man who traffics in things I can't explain. I saw lights, I heard something that wasn't wind, and by the time I got my rifle and came out onto the porch, there wasn't much left to shoot at. Just fire and smoke and the boy running out of that orange dark like something had been chasing him. He grabbed my coat and he said, plain as a man giving an order, "Sir, she's the only kin I've got left." I didn't know what he meant, not right then. I said, "Easy, son," and I got him inside and I gave him water and he stopped shaking enough to tell me. An aunt, his mother's sister, Naomi Farris, she'd kept her maiden name after her husband died, which was her own business. She was up in Harwick, a town I knew by name only, 50-some miles northeast, give or take, just past the county line at Breckenridge Creek. He'd never been to see her, but his mother had written her and Naomi had written back. And Clem had those letters in his shirt pocket, right against his chest, the whole time he was talking to me. I looked at him sitting there at my kitchen table, with soot on his face and water in his eyes, and those letters pressed against his ribs like they were the only thing keeping him upright. I thought about telling him we'd figure something out come morning. There were people in town who handled this kind of thing. The Reverend's wife. The sheriff's office, maybe, though Cord Hamlin was less useful than people gave him credit for. I looked at that boy for a long time. Then I got up and put more wood on the stove and said, "You're going to need to sleep a few hours. I've got writing to do before sunup." He looked at me like he wasn't sure he'd heard right. I said, "Go on." My horse at the time was a gray mare named Corset. Don't ask me who named her. She came to me already named, and I didn't see a reason to change what she already knew herself to be. She was strong and she was ugly, and she had the kind of endurance that made younger men with prettier animals feel ashamed of themselves. I'd ridden her through 2 blizzards and 1 flash flood, and she'd never once quit on me. I saddled her by lantern light. 3, maybe 3:15 in the morning, cool enough that I could see my breath. I left the lantern burning low on the hook outside the barn door, checked the cinch twice the way my father had taught me when I was not much older than Clem, and I rode. The first 20 miles I didn't think much. There wasn't any thinking needed. You point a horse and you ride and you let the dark have what the dark is owed. There was no moon to speak of, just a scatter of stars and the smell of smoke still hanging in the low places. I kept to the wagon road north of the creek bed, which was firmer ground. Corset knew it. I gave her the rein. Around the 6th or 7th mile, I started to think about what I was doing, not in a way that made me want to turn back, more like a man adding up numbers he already knows the answer to. I was 54 years old. I had a ranch that turned a modest profit, a dog that had died the previous winter, a sister in Missouri I wrote to twice a year, and no arrangements I couldn't walk away from for a day. The boy had nothing and nobody, and 50 miles of dark between him and the one person who might still claim him. That was the sum. The answer was north. I crossed Breckenridge Creek a little after first light. The water was cold and came up past Corset's knees, and she didn't like it, but she crossed. The county line is unmarked there, Just a change in the tree line and a drop in the elevation you feel more than see. I knew I was in Harwick County when the road went from hard-packed to soft. The soil different up here, darker, holds water longer. I stopped to water corset and eat half a biscuit I'd wrapped in cloth before leaving. The sky was the color of a bruised peach, going lighter by the minute. I found Harwick by the church steeple. That's how it always was with these small towns. You follow the highest thing until you're under it. Finding Naomi Ferris took me the better part of an hour. The man at the feed store knew her. He didn't offer that information freely. He looked at me the way men look at strangers riding in on gray mares at 7 in the morning with dust on their coats and dried creek water on their boots. I said I had news of her sister's boy, and that changed the quality of his hesitation. He told me she worked mornings at the laundry on Wheeler Street and boarded at the Callaway place on the East End. I went to the laundry first. She was folding sheets when I came in. I registered her as a woman working, which is how you register anyone in a place like that, just a person doing what the morning requires. Then she turned around and I saw her face and I understood something about that boy in a way I hadn't before. Same set to the eyes, same stillness in the jaw. I took my hat off. I said, "Ma'am, are you Naomi Ferris?" She said she was. She didn't put the sheet down. Her hands kept working while she looked at me, folding and smoothing like her hands knew better than to stop for a stranger's news. I told her who I was. I told her about the fire. I told her about Walt and June Greer, and I told her the boy was alive and I'd left him sleeping at my kitchen table 40-some miles south. She didn't cry. I want to say that clearly because I think it tells you who she was. She went still. The hand stopped. She looked at a point somewhere past my left shoulder and her mouth went to a line and she breathed, and then she looked back at me and said, "How bad is he?" I said he was scared and he'd lost people but he was whole, unhurt. I said he'd been holding her address against his chest since it happened. She looked at me for a long moment, the way a person looks at you when they're deciding whether to trust what they're seeing. I'm a big man, always have been broad in the shoulder, not the kind of face that softens easily. I've been told I don't present as a man who does things out of kindness. I stood there and I let her look. Finally she said, "You rode through the night." I said I had. She said, "Why?" I thought about that. I said because the boy asked me to and because there wasn't anybody else to do it. She nodded once, like that was the right answer and she needed to hear it said plain. Then she put the sheet down, folded neat, and said she'd need an hour. The ride back took longer. Naomi had a horse of her own, a brown gelding named Burl that was younger than Corset and had less sense. We kept a slower pace. The sun was up full by then, coming in low and sideways the way spring sun does, and the road south dried out as we rode. We didn't talk much the first 10 miles. She was not a woman who filled silence for the sake of filling it, and I had never been that kind of man. So we rode and the horses set the rhythm, and the country moved past us. At some point she said, "How long have you been ranching out here?" I said 22 years. She said, "Alone?" It wasn't quite a question. I said yes, mostly. I had a man named Dario who helped with cattle through the summer. She said, "My sister mentioned Walt Greer's neighbor in her letters. Said he was a hard man but fair. Said he left feed on their porch one winter without being asked." I didn't say anything to that. I had forgotten about the feed. It was 3 years ago, maybe 4, hard winter and the Greer stores had run short. It wasn't anything a man marks on his calendar. She said she liked that about you, my sister. I looked over at her. She was watching the road, not me. Her posture straight. She had her hair up under a flat-brimmed hat, and there was a red mark on her right hand where the laundry work had rubbed it, and she rode like a woman who'd grown up doing it. I said I didn't know her well, just to wave at. Naomi said, "I know, but she noticed things about people, she always did." We stopped at the creek to water the horses, and she walked down to the edge and stood there a moment looking at the water moving. I stayed with the horses. After a bit she came back and she stood close enough that I could see the tiredness in her face, the kind of tired that isn't sleep, the kind that comes from getting news that rearranges everything. She said, "I don't have much to offer for what you did." I said she didn't owe me anything. "The boy needed getting to you," I said. "That's the whole of it." She looked up at me then. Not quickly, not with anything soft or easy. Just looked at me straight on, the way a person looks when they want to be sure they're seeing what they think they're seeing. She said, "There aren't many men who'd ride 50 miles through the night for a child they don't know." I said I knew him well enough. She said, "No, you didn't, and you rode anyway." I didn't have an answer for that. It was true, and she'd named it plainly, and there wasn't anything to add. We stood there a minute, the creek running between the rocks, the horses pulling at the water. She put her hand on my arm. Not gentle, not the way a woman does when she wants something from you. The way a person does when they want to say something they don't have words for. She left it there a moment, and then she took it back and she walked to her horse. Clem was awake when we rode in, sitting on my porch steps, hat in his hands, watching the road south. He must have heard us coming, because he was on his feet before we cleared the cottonwoods. I watched him see her. He walked, then he ran, and she got down from that horse in one motion and she caught him and held him, and I turned Corset away and led her to the barn because that moment was theirs, and I didn't need to be standing in it. I unsaddled Corset and brushed her out and gave her a double measure of grain because she'd earned it, and I hung the tack and I stood there in the barn for a while in the smell of hay and horse and leather, listening to the quiet. After a time, Naomi came to the barn door. She said, "He wants to thank you." I said he didn't need to. She said, "I know, but he does, and so do I." I came out of the barn and Clem was standing in the yard and he looked at me with his mother's eyes. I could see that now that I'd seen Naomi, and he said, "Thank you, Mr. Hatch. Thank you for going." I put my hand on the back of his neck the way you do with a young dog that's had a bad night. I said, "You're all right, son. You're all right now." I meant it as a practical statement. He heard something bigger in it, which was his to do. Naomi stayed 3 days, making arrangements. There were papers to sign in town, decisions about the Greer land, questions about what Clem would need going forward. She sat at my kitchen table in the evenings and we talked through it, practical things, the kind of conversation that has weight to it without being heavy. The second evening she said, "I can't take him to Harwick. The laundry work isn't enough." I said no. She said, "I've been thinking about it and I don't see a way." I said, "What if you came here?" I said it the way I would have said, "What if we try the south pasture for the summer cattle?" Like a practical question that needed an answer, and I was the one who had to ask it. She looked at me across the table. The lamp was between us, and the light was doing what lamplight does to a face, making it readable in a way daytime doesn't allow. She said, "That's a big thing to offer a woman you met yesterday." I said, "I know what I'm offering. I'm not a man who says things he doesn't mean." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What would that look like?" I said it would look like her and the boy having the east room and Dario's bunkhouse for her own quarters if she wanted them, and whatever work she found for herself here or in town. I said I had 40 acres under cultivation, and more that weren't in a house that ran quiet for years that had no particular reason to stay quiet. She said, "And what would you want from it?" I said, "Company, honest company, and someone to watch over the boy when I'm out on the range." She looked at me for a long time, long enough that I heard the lamp wick crackle. Then she said, "You saved his life coming to get me. You know that." I said he saved his own life. He just needed a horse. She almost smiled. The corner of her mouth did something, and she looked down at the table and she said, "Mr. Hatch." I said, "Cal." She said, "Cal, I'm going to think on this tonight." I said that was fine. She said yes in the morning, no ceremony about it. She came out while I was at the well and she said, "We'll stay if the offer holds." I said it held. She said, "I want to be useful here. I won't be kept." I said, "I know it. That's not what I'm asking." She looked out at the range, the way it went long and flat and pale yellow in the early light, and she took a breath like she was taking a measure of the land, deciding if it could hold her. She said, "All right then." Clem grew up on that ranch. He was a better rider than me by the time he was 12, which I told him plainly because a boy needs to know when he's earned something. He learned cattle, learned fencing, learned how to read weather in the way the grass moves before the wind. He worked like he was paying a debt, and I tried once to tell him he wasn't, and he looked at me with those eyes and said, "I know. I just like it." Naomi worked. She always had. She kept a kitchen garden on the south side of the house that put up more than we could eat, so she sold the surplus in town, and she took in 2 days of seamstress work a week through the winter when there was less to do outside, and she was better with accounts than I ever was, and so eventually the accounts became hers. No discussion about it. She was better at it. That was enough. I don't know when things shifted between us. I'm not sure there was a moment I could point to, which is maybe how it works when it's real. There was just one morning, maybe a year in, when she brought coffee out to the fence line where I was working, and she stood next to me, and we looked at the range together, and I thought, there it is. Whatever it was I'd been missing for 22 years, there it is. I didn't say it then, I said it later. I'm not a fast man. She said, "I know. I've been waiting for you to catch up." I'm telling this from the far end of it now, many years out. Clem has a spread of his own up near the ridge, married a woman from Santa Fe, 2 boys and a girl, and he still rides down on Sundays more often than not. The 3 of them, sometimes all 5. Naomi is inside right now. I can hear her through the window, moving around in the kitchen, doing whatever she's doing at this hour. That sound, her moving through the house, I never got used to it in the sense of taking it for granted. Every morning I hear it and I know what it means. One night a boy grabbed my coat and said, "Sir, she's the only kin I've got left." And I said, "Easy, son," and saddled a gray mare and rode north through the dark. I didn't know what I was riding toward. I thought I was just delivering a boy to his people. But I came back with more than I left with. A woman who looked at me straight and saw what was there. A child who grew into a man I'm proud to know. A house that had noise in it, good noise, the kind that tells you the walls are doing what walls are for. The gray mare is long gone. The east room is a sewing room now. The kitchen still smells like that garden when the windows are open. I wouldn't change a mile of that ride.